Okay, this one's going to be a very short video, but it talks about a very critical subject that everybody needs to be aware of. Um, when it comes to knowing whether or not you're being lied to, one of the critical things to understand are the 10 Ds, responding to the opposition. And I provide the source here at the bottom for where I found this online. But these 10 things were originally introduced to me via a man who was my personal lawyer. He used to always try and convince me to go into law because he'd say that I had a very rare ability to spin an entire case on one word. And I would tell him, would you ever go back into law if you had to start all over? And this was a man who had like 30 years experience probably at the time in law. And I would have lunch with him, and when he'd try and convince me to go into law, I'd say, would you go back into law? And I'll never forget his answer, because he answered, no, I wouldn't, because you have to defend people that you know are guilty. And when you come out fresh out of law school, a lot of times that's where you find your first jobs, is as a public defender. And, if that's how we start lawyers off in their new careers, is by basically forcing them to defend people they know are guilty. Some may say, oh, well, that's a great skill to have. It'll teach you important stuff. But when I look at this, it's teaching people how to lie. Why can't we defend people with the truth anymore? This is a really big problem with the legal system. But anyway, so it's important to know the 10 Ds of law. And they are deflect. I call them the 10 Ds of law. They're really known as the 10 Ds, responding to the opposition. Deflect, delay, deny, discount, deceive, divide, dulcify. To dulcify means to appease somewhat. You give somebody a little bit of a win, and they think that they've won, and so because they're appeased, that helps to, you know, tone down the issues or the problems. There's also discredit. My favorite, destroy. Yes, how often do lawyers, regulators, whatever, destroy? They have no problem, in my opinion, with destroying people in order to cover their tracks. And the last one is deal. And I would always tell regulators, via my emails and whatever, I will never deal with any of you, because you can't change the issues if you know that's one of the big problems with settling out of court in lawsuits, is deals are swung behind closed doors, and the real issues never come to the surface. And so even though I've spent years discussing issues with the family of conductor trainee Jason Clooney, specifically his parents. Those were the only two I really had communicated with numerous times over the years. I told them, any of my intellectual property, my files, my analysis, whatever, I will be fine with, initiating a class action lawsuit, and I will give you everything you need, provided there will never be any settling out of court, because you can't help protect other rail workers and the public and so many other groups if there's always deals being done behind the scenes. And so that was a huge issue for me, that there is no settling out of court in these matters. It has to go right to the end so that proper precedents can be set. But again, I just wanted people to know the 10 Ds. I'll probably refer to them as the 10 Ds of law, even though that's not really what they're known as, only because my lawyer had introduced them to me. But when we're talking about the 10 Ds in any of my materials, this is what I'm talking about, are these tactics. And you have to understand the tactics of the opposition in order to discredit them and, expose the truth. I am of the very strong belief that as people learn about this website, more and more rail workers will probably be watching it. And in the rail industry, a lot of times there's more than one person in one family that may work for the rail industry. It's kind of a generational thing. My father worked for the railroad, I worked for the railroad, whatever. But as more and more family members of frontline rail workers come to see the issues being raised in these videos, you know, they may have been a party to past settlements for wrongs, for, you know, a death that occurred, or maybe for a seriously injured worker. And in law, there's something called clean hands. If one of the parties, for example, the rail carrier, doesn't have clean hands, and they gain the offer, the acceptance of a financial offer or a contract for families to remain quiet, and we'll pay you this much, provided you don't discuss this with the press and whatever. Well, those offers and the acceptance and the contract may be nullified by the fact that a party did not have clean hands when the offer was made. And so the fact that you may have had a past settlement for a death in the rail industry or for serious injury may not mean that that past settlement is still valid if something comes to light to show that there were not clean hands, especially if that could involve criminal activity. For example, violations of laws, all kinds of stuff. So that's just something I wanted to make families aware of, that in law there has to be clean hands, and contracts have to be made in good faith for them really to be valid. And if they're not made in good faith, or there's fraud involved, then that can bring the validity of a contract back into play. So that's just something I wanted families to be aware of. Now, again, just a few basic things in law here. There's also the concept of fraud as defined by a legal dictionary. It's when you have wrongful deception with the intent to gain personally or financially. So let's say that somebody in your family died or was seriously injured in the rail industry, and there's an out-of-court settlement that was reached. Well, if there was any fraud involved, again, that would not be clean hands. So if, for example, a rail executive or a rail carrier gains personally because they get to keep their careers and they're not exposed for their wrongdoing, or they gain financially because they get to keep their jobs, or for the company the stock price doesn't fall as wrongdoing is not exposed. Again, you know, fraud is a huge issue when it comes to settlements, be they going forward or past settlements. So again, just issues I wanted people to be aware of, because a lot of times, you know, a lot of people are not aware of these issues and they think, well, we settled out of court. Well, there are things that, if they're brought to light, especially if there's anything criminal, that can seriously negate past settlements or contracts and allow families to reinitiate or become a party to class actions or whatever. So again, just an issue you need to be aware of. Okay, so if you're a family that had a loved one die or seriously injured in the rail industry, and you're thinking, okay, well, we had a settlement. Would some of this apply to our family? And could we join into a class action lawsuit if ever one was initiated? Well, I can absolutely show that problems with fake qualifications of frontline rail workers were definitely identified by Transport Canada as far back as 2007. That's like 18 years ago, folks. And a lot of these issues were quite frankly never addressed. And some of the rail safety actions taken were in and of themselves total and complete public scams. And we're going to get into all of these issues. I'm going to go over, you know, the reports. I'm going to go over safety actions taken and show where the problems are with those safety actions taking. We're going to be going through a lot of information on this site. So that would be the cutoff that I would tell people. September of 2007, there was a Mac Yard incident. Mac Yard is a large CN rail yard outside of Toronto. And it is clear from a railway investigation report that was written at that time that there were some serious issues that Transport Canada failed to address, basically to this day, in my opinion. And what's interesting here too is that there's another issue I would like to bring up here real quick. And it's the fact that the person who was the Minister of Transportation at the time was John Baird. And this happened under Stephen Harper. I don't care what color they wear, red, blue, orange for the NDP. In my opinion, they've all been hiding these issues for a very, very long time. And, to me, that's complete breach of public trust and willful ignorance. When you see crimes happening and there's some serious issues as far as frontline worker safety, and you fail to address that, and you have a legally imposed duty to do so, there's some serious issues there that need to be addressed. And so that's what this website aims to look at, and to inform people of what those issues are, so that we can indeed create Rail Families United, because this affects more than just the frontline rail workers. If you are a rail customer, that you ship your goods via rail, if you're a rail investor, whatever, all of these issues impact you. So again, but the thing about John Baird, he was Minister of Transportation when the Mac Yard incident happened in 2007 in September. And John Baird would go on to become a person on the board at CP Rail. People should have a huge issue with regulators being in bed with rail carriers, where they can then go in the future and get big salaries and sit on the boards and do whatever. I mean, that should not be happening. This revolving door of, I'm going to work for the government in Transport Canada, or, whatever the counterpart is in the US, the Surface Transportation Board, and then I'll go work for the rail carrier, and then I'll come back with what I've learned and what I need to hide maybe via Transport Canada. And it's a very nasty revolving door, because this, in my opinion, is what is resulting in what I call rail PICs. P-I-C and then a small s. Rail PICs is my abbreviation for Rail Partners in Crime. And when you hear me talk about rail PICs, that's what I'm talking about. These relationships where we're going to get together and we're going to hide some stuff that's been going on and make sure the public isn't aware of this, and who's going to spend years of their lives, as I did, trying to uncover some very nasty truths. So again, if your family lost a loved one, or someone was seriously injured, and you had an out-of-court settlement, and you're wondering, geez, were there clean hands here involved, or could they have been pretty dirty? I think that going back to at least 2007, if you had a settlement after that, you may have reason to want to relook at that settlement after you learn the information on this channel. Okay, so just another quick one. Let's move on. Okay, so that's all I have for you on this short video. Remember to like, share, and subscribe so that we can get as many people to join this channel and share this information with as many people as we possibly can. So thanks a lot, and I'll see you on the next one.